Will you consider this? You grew up and it was tough, and you maybe even made it tougher on yourself. And Jonathan Romaine is here to testify that he was exactly that person who needed to change some things, and now you're helping people to change that narrative.
That's certainly what we're trying to do.
Okay, so first, for people who maybe don't know your story, in a nutshell, give it to us. You grew up in the Chicago area.
Grew up on the west side of Chicago, was involved with just about everything you can imagine that goes on in inner cities, and was in and out of jail from a very young age.
And you were in a gang.
Was in a gang. And it's weird because I never felt like I was in a gang. But because of the neighborhood that I grew up in, you were just by default a part of it. Your family were
That was your
members.
tribe.
Yeah, and so, without really ascribing to what people would think a gang is, I was in a gang, if that makes sense.
All right.
But I never felt like a gang banger. I never felt like a real gang member. I just felt like these were my people. But yeah, so I grew up in that environment, and living in certain areas in America, things are almost upside down. What should be right is wrong, and what should be wrong is right.
And how did that happen?
That's the $100 trillion question. You know what I'm saying? It's, I'm sure, layered with one thing after another, after another, after another. I mean, when you think you found where it started.
And what that answer is.
Right, it's something that started that.
Right, exactly.
That started that, that started that. And so we're layered with complexities in the community. And so I don't worry, not that I don't worry, I certainly do take into consideration some of the elements that help to lead up to that from my limited knowledge. But more importantly, I try to figure out what is the solution. You know what I'm saying? We can opine all day long about how we got here. Now let's try to figure out how we get out of here.
Right. So before we get into that in detail, then you did some time in prison as well. You came down to Peoria, Illinois, and went to college, so that was fortunate. How did that happen? Well, first you went to junior college.
Yeah, so I never took school serious, and it wasn't until I was getting ready to graduate, and the reality of trying to figure out what to do with my life like slapped me in the face. And I knew that I did not want to be stuck in the rut that I saw all around me. And I figured the best way to attack that is by trying to go to school, but I never took school seriously. And I finished high school at the bottom 10% of my high school class, never took an ACT or an SAT. College was never on my mind. And just literally at the last minute, I was like, maybe I'll go to school. And I talked to my counselor. She really kind of, I wouldn't say she discouraged me, but she definitely didn't encourage me. And it didn't seem as
somewhere
feasible.
In between, yeah,
it didn't seem as feasible when I left that meeting with her. So I went and took a test to go to the Marine Corps because I was just trying to get out of Dodge. Passed the test, and literally 2 weeks before I was going to enlist, a friend of mine told me that in an inadvertent conversation, had nothing to do
with anything.
She didn't even know I was thinking about school, right? But she was just saying that, you could go to a junior college no matter how well you did in school, as long as you had a high school diploma or its equivalency. And that was my aha moment. So I shot over to Triton, which is outside of Chicago, registered for school, and did well enough to where Bradley accepted me the following year. And for me, that was like probably the biggest moment of my life, is being accepted to a university like Bradley, coming from where I came from, because nobody, when I told them I did that, believed it.
I bet.
Nobody thought it was, this is a kid that was in and out of jail and, in a gang, and, it was so inconceivable for everybody that knew me. But here I was in Peoria at Bradley, and what I had successfully done. I removed myself from that
From
environment,
right.
but that environment was
Came
still in
with
me.
you. Yeah.
And so I was still doing everything that I was doing on the west side of Chicago that was landing me in and out of jail.
All right. So you can take the boy out of Chicago, but you can't take the Chicago out of
Right,
him. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And so, at the end of my junior year, I was actually arrested for selling narcotics, and I bonded out, fought the case for the senior year, and 2 weeks before I was supposed to graduate, I was convicted. The judge let me bond out for sentencing to graduate. And then 2 weeks after I graduated, I turned myself in and I was given 15 years in prison. And for me, I looked at it not as a devastating moment in my life, because I was smart enough to realize that the things that I was doing could ultimately lead me there. I was hopeful that it wouldn't, but you roll the dice and you sometimes crap out. And
But it
so
was your lesson.
it was a lesson, but I also determined myself to come out of prison better than when I went in.
Okay.
And so from the very beginning, I was just looking for opportunities to turn that 15-year prison sentence into an asset and not a liability.
Okay.
And as long as I came out of there stronger, smarter, more capable, then it wouldn't have all been for naught.
Right.
And that's what I did. And it just so happened I stumbled into my first love, which was art. I never thought I was good enough to be an artist.
And then how did that exposure come to you in prison?
Well, so I just walked by a guy's cell and he was drawing. And I knew I loved to draw. So I found out how I could get my own equipment and I started drawing. But I still wasn't taking art seriously. But after about a year of drawing, and this is like an accelerated, intense process, because you have absolutely nothing but time and razor-like focus. And if you do anything with that kind of concentrated effort, you're bound to, get some good results.
Exactly.
And so my drawings became really, really remarkable to even my worst critic, who was me.
Oh, well,
Right.
That's good.
And then, as fate would have it, a guy from the south side of Chicago came to this prison. He had been in and out of prison most of his life because he had a heroin addiction, but he was an incredible sign painter and also an incredible fine artist. He came into that art room that we all shared, the inmates, and he was knocking out these beautiful oil paintings in a day, when everybody else who was pretending to paint, I would call it, would taking 2 and 3 months to do something that looked one fraction of what he was doing.
Yes.
And I was just like in awe. But he looked at my drawings and he was like, oh man, you can do this. And he just kept encouraging me. And I just kept watching him. And, maybe about a month after that, I ordered my first set of oil paints and started painting. And for about a week, I kind of shadowed him. But then he ended up going to segregation because he got caught with some contraband. But when he came out, he didn't even recognize my oil paintings.
Is that right?
Yeah, because he thought somebody new had came to the institution when he saw him, because that's how fast I had actually developed that skill.
Wow.
And this is the craziest thing. While I was at Bradley, I took a painting class. And guess what? That is the only F on my transcript.
Well,
Isn't that crazy?
funny how life turns around.
Right.
So now back to, we know that narrative. So you got out and you managed to do something with your life through
Right.
your art. And you know what the narrative has been. And again, as you said, we don't really know how we got there because it just snowballed.
Right.
This led to this, led to this, led to that. So you have a program, you have a presentation that you're making to change the narrative for kids who grew up like you.
Right. So with we have a after-school program where we took an old school building and converted it into a community arts center.
Right, at Art Inc., and that's
Art
on
Inc.
Northeast Jefferson. Yes.
Yep, and we service between 100 and 150 kids every day. But one of the grants that we're operating off of, we actually titled it Change That Narrative. And this whole thing came into existence as the result of a meeting that I had monthly with a group of community leaders and the mayor,
Okay.
Mayor Rita Ali. And she just charged us with trying to come up with solutions to curtail some of the challenges we face in the inner city. And so I always in the back of my mind thought about how the media has had an overwhelming role in shaping the narrative of the way people think and the way people act in many situations.
Right.
And I said, I've never seen that awesome tool used.
In the right way.
Well, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say that because it has been used in the right way in many cases.
In some instances.
But it
yes.
hasn't been used to attack some of the challenges that African Americans and brown and BIPOC
color.
communities
Right.
deal with. And I actually read a book a while ago. It was about a guy who had a marketing company, and it's slipping my mind right now, but in Chicago, one of the biggest black advertising firms in the nation, he wrote a book, and it actually talked about if you put a monetary value on the negative media that African Americans have been exposed to over the years, it would be billions and billions of dollars. So I'm saying let's use this technology to
Change that narrative.
change that narrative.
Right.
And it's like introduce the community to an alternative way of thinking about some of the things that we take for granted. For example, the whole concept of snitches get stitches.
Right.
Right. That's like a overwhelming, prevailing point of view in the community, and everybody adheres to it. We teach our kids not to be tattletales and all of these different things. But if you look in a community that has signs up that says, a neighborhood watch signs,
Right.
and we will call the police and all of these things. Those are the safest neighborhoods in our communities, right? Because those people are taking an active stand.
And caring for each other.
100%.
Yes.
And we have somehow distorted perhaps where the real reasoning behind that concept came from. Because, the whole idea of the police department came by way of
Getting information.
well, no. I'm talking about right after
After something
slavery.
happened. Okay, all right.
Right after slavery, the police departments began by police patrols, and they were getting these blacks and basically turning them back into a pseudo form of slavery through the if you do something wrong, then you have to serve time in working in the fields, because obviously a lot of plantation owners were short of workers, right? And so this was how it started, and so quite naturally, the black community was resistant of that.
Any kind of information.
Absolutely, and that just evolved over time. But now, it has it has turned into something a lot more pernicious and more destructive to the community itself, because the worst elements in our community are allowed to prosper and to grow based off of what eventually started as an altruism for the community. And now it's like, you feel worse by telling on someone than that person who did the crime feels about the crime that they did.
Okay, interesting.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so we have to start challenging that and understanding that sometimes if you tell on a person that's destroying the community, you're doing the community the favor.
Exactly.
And if you don't tell on them, you might as well be doing the same thing that person is doing.
Or worse.
or
Right.
worse. So our silence, and I was obviously a victim of this way of thinking growing up on the west side of Chicago, being a gang member, a drug dealer, a thief, everything you can imagine. And I fell into that too, right? But as I became wiser, as I got more mature, and I started to understand that we need to protect our community. We need to stand up for those in our community that can't stand up for themselves, and that's our children.
Exactly.
That's our mothers, our sisters. We need to be in the front row as a line of defense for those people and those things that we hold so near and dear to our heart. And we can't allow these things that a lot of us don't even know where it came from to dictate and determine how we're going to respond.
You need to step up.
You got to step up. And it's almost a revolutionary concept now,
Right.
because so many people are so opposed to it.
Well, so what are you doing in order to change the narrative? How are you reaching kids?
So what we're doing is, through our grant that we have, is we're talking about these concepts, and we're using all of the different forms of art to actually help change that narrative and shape these young people's minds and teach them that there is a different way of thinking that is more productive and that is more altruistic than the way that we have been taught. Even, for example, the whole notion of being a gangster.
Right.
You know, that's so prevalent among so many of our young people.
Right, and they think it's important.
They think it's important.
Yeah.
You know, we feign intelligence to look
Powerful and in control.
absolutely. And so we just have to dispel those myths and to show how, if you start looking at life different, the results are going to be more desirable. And I use my life as an example.
a glaring
Absolutely.
example.
And so when I was inundated with all of these negative thoughts and concepts, I was miserable. I'm having to look over my shoulders.
At every instant, yes.
I'm snatched off the streets right at probably the most proudest moment of my life, graduating from college, something that I thought I would never do, and thrown into a prison and had to spend 7.5 of a 15-year prison sentence there. While in there, had to deal with and endure the challenges of being in prison.
And the gangs in prison.
The gangs, not even just in prison, but on the streets. You know, all of the things that we have to deal with by trying to adhere to these thoughts and these concepts that are so detrimental to us, our community, our family. And then when I let those things go, and I started looking at things from a different perspective and changing that narrative, now, you know, I'm an accomplished artist. I sell my art all over the country. I get good money for my art. I bought the old school, renovated it, turned it into a community art center. We have 15 full-time staff, 50 part-time staff. The energy that I put into the universe, it comes back to me tenfold.
Tenfold, yeah.
Right. You know what I'm saying? But the same energy I put in when I was a young man, it came back tenfold too. It came back tenfold.
So do you really feel that you are reaching the kids because you're a living example, because you're a person of color, and because you have this not so good background that, but you, karma, you changed it around, and here you are.
Well, you know, I think that because of my background, young people that adhere to that type of lifestyle are more receptive to listen to me. But, you know, I'm not unmindful of the fact that it's very difficult to think, well, it's not difficult, it's probably naive to think that one person
Can make that much of a difference.
You can make that much of a difference with some people. But to make enough of a difference in
numbers.
Numbers, that's a different ball game. But I do think if we start approaching this problem from this angle, and it's something that can swell nationally, I definitely think it can make a difference, because I do see the difference that we're making on an individual level.
So grassroots.
Absolutely. I see how some of the young people that come into our program after being with us for a year and a half start to look at things differently, start to act in a different way. And so I know it is effective, but it's a lot of work.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's a lot of work.
Aha moments. They're tough to get to.
100%, yeah.
But you have this book now, so
Yep.
tell me about the book. It's called Change That Narrative.
Yeah, so the book was born from this grant that we're working out of. And so it was, like I said, we're using the different genres of art to send that message of changing that narrative. And the book is actually a collaboration with over 50 artists from across the country who have outstanding art careers already. These are artists that I've shown with, that I've met through my 25-year career as a full-time artist. And they were gracious enough to contribute art that spoke to this whole concept of change that narrative. And so now we're taking this book, here you go, in the book, and the art from the book, and we're doing exhibitions all over. We're actually on our 4th exhibition, which now is actually in Washington, D.C., the suburbs of Washington, D.C. I actually fly there in a couple of weeks. We already took the art to a facility that's called the Sabroff Forbes Cultural Arts Center, and it's in the suburb of Washington, D.C. And we'll have the art there for about a month. And then we're going to come back. We're working on some things of taking the book and the collection of art to the state capitol. And we're just, on a very grassroots level.
Let it snowball from there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. So who picked out, did you pick out all of the works, or you let the artists pick them out?
Well, I picked out the artists and asked them to give me something that either they wanted to create or they had already created that would speak to change that narrative. And like, for example, one of the artists, Paul Goodnight, who's a phenomenally incredible artist and a very accomplished artist as well, when I told him about it, he was so excited because it was something that he already was thinking about doing in some capacity. And he had already had these pieces that spoke to that. Like, he had one piece that's in the book. It's called KKK.
Oh.
Kids Killing Kids.
Interesting.
Right.
Interesting twist
And so
on that.
a lot of the artists, it didn't take a lot of movement to get them to be a part of it, because a lot of them feel in some way or another the same way that I feel, that we as creative people, we have to take our talents and try to do whatever we can to leverage those talents to make a difference in our community.
In a creative way.
In a creative way.
And you feel that the kids are already responding.
Oh, I absolutely do. I mean, when just the Art Center in general, just Art Inc. in general, when
150 kids a day.
Between 100 150 kids daily. But when we're doing things with them, we have what we call Fun Friday. Every day it's like a party at Art Inc. And you see these kids laughing and running, and they're safe. They're
And
in
that's a big
creative
problem.
space.
It's that after school time
From
that
3 to 6.
Yeah.
That's one of the most crucial periods of the day for our young people. And to have them in a safe, fun, creative space, to see them laughing and playing and being kids, that by itself is more rewarding than anything I've ever done in my life.
That's awesome. Inspirational for sure. So the book is, they can get it at the Art Inc.
You
website.
can go to www.changethatnarrative.org, or you can get it portal through the website for Art Inc. as well, and that's www.artincpeoria.org.
All right. Where else will you go with this then? You've been a couple of places, and do you have a lot of interest already for people who really need to make a change?
So we've already gone to, we have 4 locations that we've already done, and I'm trying to work with an organization. I'm gonna keep that under my hat.
Okay.
I don't want to bring that up because I don't want to jinx it.
Till the deal's done.
Right, but I have a national organization that I am flirting with to maybe get them to do a national tour of the book. So,
And will you go on all of those, or some of the other artists will participate?
well, some of the, we offer an invitation to the artists to participate in any one that they want. Like when we had the first show here in Peoria, over 15 of those artists flew in from all over the country for our first show. The other locations were smaller locations, so I didn't ask that of them to do, but in DC we'll have some more there. In fact, several of the artists in the book live in the DC area. So as we go, you know, we'll just figure out what makes the most sense
Keep
with
on
every
keeping
stop.
on.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
It's so nice that you are helping the next generations, plural.
Yeah, and let me tell you this, on the tail end of that, Nikki and I, my wife, we started this thinking that that's what we were going to be doing. But when we walk into that building every single day, it's what those kids give us.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks. Thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
Jonathan, for being here. Hope you enjoyed listening to his fascinating story and his vision. You got to keep that in perspective. Keep changing things. Change that narrative.
you.
Thanks for being here. Be well.